Have you ever experienced a God wink? You know, the kind of experience you know without a shadow of a doubt that God stepped in and gave you a big old wink from heaven. I'm your host, Cindy Spar, broadcasting from Office Evolution in Troy, Michigan. I am the founder of My Collective Network and My Christian Business Network, two amazing business networking organizations. I am a firm believer that there is power in sharing God wink stories. Think of it as a way for people to shine their light on Jesus, one wink at a time. In Matthew 5:14, it says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Welcome, everyone. This is Cindy Spar coming to you live from Office Evolution in Troy, Michigan. And I am so excited today. I have two special guests with me, husband and wife, that I met through a previous guest of the God Wink podcast. So just a little shout out right now to Veronica Lopiccolo. Girlfriend, you are the bomb diggity. Thank you so much for this introduction to this lovely couple. Listeners, I would love to introduce you to Mel and Twyla. They have served such an amazing ministry for so many years. I just want to take a moment for them to introduce themselves before we dive into their God Wink. So welcome, Mel. Welcome, Twyla, to the God Wink.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Well, guys, you have shared some amazing nuggets and God Winks along the way. I would just first love to have you share a little bit about the ministry that you've had for years. I know have since changed with that ministry coming to that close, but share a little bit about Night Angels.
Yeah, we had assessed that we were turning the page in a new chapter in our lives, and I was getting ready to retire. I had a career in human resources and an automotive and then a steel company. And Twyla was a retired school teacher, and she had been a paralegal for many years. And she'd been retired for a while, but it was time for us to sort of go a new route. And we were praying about it. And we had been church people for a long time, and we had done all the jobs in the church that most people do, from changing diapers in the nursery to being on the worship team and fundraising and being a deacon and an elder. We had done all those jobs. And one of the things that we hadn't done, because I was a workaholic, I'm reformed now, and I clearly understand that work is overrated. But at the time, I worked a lot in raising a family. We had never taken a missions trip. And we were assessing, well, now we're going to have more time on our hands. We're going to be retirees. And we wanted to take a missions trip. And we thought that meant going to Thailand or Chile or Ecuador or Vietnam or Malaysia or something like that. And we heard about the problem of human trafficking. And when someone said the words human trafficking to us, I had a vision of something that occurred somewhere else, in Eastern Europe or in Thailand specifically, but not here, not in Michigan, not near my hometown. And when we heard that human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, was such a problem here in Detroit, it really took our breath away. And we heard about people who were doing street outreach to human trafficking victims, and I said, I could do that. Nobody knows the city like I do. I grew up in Detroit. I'm a product of Detroit Public Schools and Wayne State University, and have lived here in the area all my life. And I said I could do something. I could help in some way, shape, or form. I wasn't sure what that really meant, but we we got involved initially, and we started understanding the dynamic of sex trafficking, and it's a very dark and evil dynamic. And Twyla decided she was going to join in it as well. And it was about 8 years ago now, eight and a half years ago now, we decided to start an organization, our own 501c3 called Night Angels. And we had an area of the city in southwest Detroit that I specifically had become to love over the years, not too far from the area of Old Tiger Stadium in southwest Detroit along the Michigan Avenue corridor. And we decided it was by studying southeastern Michigan, we decided that that Michigan Avenue corridor is probably one of the heaviest trafficked of abusing and using trafficking victims in the area. Whether you can go as far as Pontiac or as far as downriver or way out into the west side or the east side into Mount Clemens. But that is probably it was at the time one of the busiest area where human trafficking victims are being abused. So we decided to pick that area, and we were able to recruit, and God led us to many, many volunteers. But we had a roster usually of 26, 28, 30 volunteers, unpaid, as Twyla always likes to say, unpaid volunteers, and we worked for a total of 10 years on the street doing outreach to sex trafficking victims. And we were probably able to meet, Twyla?
Over 7,000 victims in the 3 areas that we had ministered in. And we were able to help over 600 get off of the streets.
Wow.
Yeah.
And, with only working in those few areas, that in and of itself tells a story about how big the problem is. And, my reaction again was not in Detroit. This doesn't happen in Detroit, not in my hometown, not where I grew up. And we found out something radically different.
It was amazing what we saw out there. Yeah. Hollywood does not do anything for this cause. The girls that we see are emaciated. They're weighing 75 to 100 pounds, missing their teeth, very thinning hair, full of abscesses and needle marks, and filthy, dressed in layers because that's the only way that they can stay clean. It's really sad.
For people that have the vision of street prostitution as Pretty Woman, they are really missing the reality of it all, because our friends are in a very dark place and being controlled with heroin. When the trafficker gets a heroin needle in an individual's arm, there is the control. They don't need handcuffs. They don't need a rope. They don't need chains. That heroin needle becomes the controlling agent to trafficking victims' lives. And one of the things, and I want to make very clear to people that are listening, one of the things, especially I as a man, had to struggle with, but I had to understand very quickly, is no woman ever chooses a life of prostitution. Prostitutes are in that life because they have been driven there because of a vulnerability that the trafficker understands better than anybody else, and they exploit that vulnerability for their financial gain.
Yes. And their financial gain is transferred into a quota for the girls, and they have to make that quota every day. And I say day because there's not a night shift and a day shift out there. It's a 24-hour day. And they are given a quota. If they don't make that quota, then they are severely beaten.
Yeah, abused.
I don't even comprehend to how, with doing this for years, that you had shared, there was a level, you guys were always out there, right? Like you not necessarily wouldn't constrain the amount of time that you were putting out there, but you said with your team, you were very careful about that. You said, because there's a lot of stuff.
Well, we rotated members of our team. Our team, there was about 28 people. And we tried not to over-traumatize our own team because you take it with you. You can't cry. You can't show that deep emotion while you're on outreach because you're praying with somebody. And within 3 to 5 minutes, you're praying with somebody else and you're hearing all these stories. And you got to take that home with you and process it there with the Lord.
We used a bait and switch model. We used an SUV, a large, very manly SUV, and we would take it to the street, and we would see a woman or a man working on the side of the street, and we would pull up, and we took out a team of 4 people, so there's 4 people in this large SUV, and we'd roll down the windows on the passenger side.
Hang on a second. There's also 2 people at home. One is a prayer warrior and one is a tracker. And that team of 4 does not leave until we have those 2 at home on duty.
Right. So we pull up, we lower our windows on the passenger side, and the person in front says, hey, we're from Night Angels, so would you be interested in a sandwich and a hygiene kit? So food, right? Mm-hmm. Give them food, they will come. Well, the first time you meet somebody, it's screw you, strong message to follow. They don't respond very well the first time. But they see us week after week after week after week.
Same
after
time,
week.
every
Same
week.
time, same day of the week. And they begin to ask people on the street, who are these idiots? What are they doing out here? And they find out that we're not doing anything for our own gain. We're out there to be servants. So they walk up to our SUV and they say, yeah, I'll take a sandwich. I'll take a hygiene kit. So before we give them the hygiene kit and the sandwich, we ask to pray with them. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to insert Jesus Christ into that dynamic. That's our first attempt. And we say, can we pray with you? And they don't know how to pray. They don't know what to pray for.
They don't know what a prayer request is.
Yeah, they don't. So, but we do end up giving them the sandwich, and we do end up giving them the hygiene kit. And then next week, when we see them, they've thought about what we've asked them. So they might say, well, you could pray for my aunt, or you could pray for my girlfriend, or you can pray for me, and here's a need I have. So we begin building that trust every week at every same time, whether if it snowed, if it rained, if it hailed, if it stormed, we were out there. We tried to never miss a week.
Did you create a line?
We did.
We did.
We
had to manage the line.
We had to manage the line, and we had plans for that, and that's why we had 4 people in the car, because sometimes we would get inundated, and we would take clothing, and I always whined and cried to Twyla, you can't get all that stuff in this SUV. I know it's a big manly SUV, but you can't get all that stuff you want to take out there. But she always did.
She's good at Tetris.
She always did. She always managed to get much more than I ever thought possible.
And we always had it empty when we came home.
And it was always empty when we came home. So, but it does, the logistics of it gets a little hairy sometimes. And we made so many friends and saw so many wonderful things happen. And we saw some very ugly things, and we were disappointed. But the Lord just gave us the strength and the ability to overcome all that and just keep going out there It was Monday night. We would go out every Monday night at 7 o'clock, and usually by the time we would usually run out of supplies after about 2 hours. Mm-hmm. But we'd spend 2 hours praying and giving and talking and trying to get people to trust us enough. We would give them a card, and it would have a phone number on the card, and we said, call us, and we will help you exit the street. First of all, they needed 99 times out of 100, they needed drug rehab. So they needed detox. They needed long-term drug rehab. And Twyla had networked through southeastern Michigan, and we had many, many options. One of our favorite places, and I'll give a plug, is to Grace Centers of Hope in Pontiac, Michigan. They're just a phenomenal organization.
Absolutely. We could call them in the middle of the night if we had to.
Yeah, and they would make a way. But we used a lot of other, facilities too, and you always want to find a round peg for a round hole, and not every facility is exactly right for a particular individual. And we dealt with transgender people, people from all kinds of different walks and backgrounds. A lot of people think because we were ministering in Detroit that this was a Detroit urban problem, and these were Detroit people that grew up in Detroit and lived in Detroit. It's absolutely wrong. We saw as many people from Royal Oak and Bloomfield and Troy and Madison Heights, and
90% is what we came up with.
Oh, majority are outside.
90% are from the suburbs.
Wow.
Yeah.
For whatever vulnerability got them there, 90% were
Wow.
from their suburbs.
Yeah. I find interesting how you bring up Grace Centers of Hope. I've always heard about the organization, right? Have not been a part or, really experienced it, but heard great things. And I rarely go out to networking opportunities. I'll just be honest. I own a networking company, so I'm working on the company stuff. But, I would get all these, invitations, lovely invitations to come out to different networking events. And it was last Saturday or the Saturday before that. I'm like, I'm going to go out to Chief Financial Credit Union for this networking event because we're going to be doing an event there too. And it's always a lovely event. It's very philanthropic. It's about telling people about what is out there to be a part of in the community. Who do you think the keynote was?
Pam Clark.
Grace Centers of Hope. It was a gentleman, actually. And I'm like, wow, I've always heard about you guys, and was super excited that they were speaking about what they're doing to help. But then when you said it, I was just like, man, there's always just I love the timing.
That sounds like a God-wink moment.
Yes. It does.
Well, we didn't just always minister to the girls. We ministered to homeless that were out there. And sometimes the homeless were men. And sometimes we ministered to traffickers, and customers / Johns would come to the window for prayer.
Wow.
We've actually taken a couple of traffickers off the street. And so when you take a trafficker off the street, you're taking about 6 girls off the street.
Right. That gives me chills.
When we first started with this, the organization we were first aligned with, they didn't believe in that. They didn't like us doing that. But what we found was when you feed some people on the street and don't feed other people, there's a very negative dynamic that occurs. So we just said, if you're on the street, we're going to feed you. We want people to, number one, like us, trust us, and work. We wanted them working with each other to help each other, as opposed to setting up some sort of negative kind of connotation. So we did work with just about anybody. And Twyla's right. I mean, we met pimps, we met drug dealers, we cried with them, we talked to them, we prayed with them just as much as we would anybody else. And Jesus has a way.
Tell us about the multiplication of the fishes and the loaves.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, we always had Twyla would work so hard in the packing that SUV like a sardine can, but we did have a finite amount of stuff. And one of the key things that we always had were fresh sandwiches. Our donors always made fresh, really good sandwiches for people. And then we had like a school lunch. We had potato chips and pretzels and other stuff that went in the lunch too. But having a fresh sandwich was really important. And we only had so many of them. And I would talk to the people I was usually a driver. And I would talk to the young ladies that were usually in the car with me, because this is really a woman's to woman's ministry. But we did have some men on the team to drive, like
And
I
to
did.
pray with the men.
And to pray with the men. So I would I would be counting in my head as we were going through the night how many sandwiches we'd used. And I would ask the ones in the back seat, okay, how many we got left? And I'd hear 5. Okay, 5 left. So we'd service 5 more people, and I'd say, well, it's time to go to the barn, time to call it a night. Oh, we have 2 more. What? What's wrong with you people?
Can't you count?
Aren't you college-educated people back there? And I'd give them a hard time just because I like giving them a hard time. But God was always adding to it.
Yeah. We used to have a little game called Mystery of the Last Lunch,
Yeah,
too.
yeah, we did.
Because we could give out all of the lunches except one, and all of a sudden the neighborhood would just go dark. Like, we wouldn't see anybody for miles and miles, and we keep going back and forth on the track, We're like, we got to give out this last one. Who's this for? We'd pray, and the Lord, show us who it is, And that last lunch was like always something special.
Aww.
And a lot of times it led to a rescue.
We had a donor one night whose dad.
Oh, yeah.
You got to tell the story.
Oh, Mr. Tough Guy. So I had a student once upon a time, and her father had been homeless at a point in his life. It was a real low point. And he's recovered. He's, doing very well now. But in honor of his birthday, she contacted me and said, I want to send lunches out with you on your outreach. We're like, great, that would be wonderful. She goes, I'm going to drop them off at your house. She told me, we arranged the time and everything. And mystery of the last lunchtime, we had one lunch. We couldn't find the person who was supposed to get this lunch. And we were heading back to the barn, as Mel calls it, and way over on the other side of the street where we very rarely would see anybody. It was in the dark with some guy pushing a shopping cart full of returnables. Bottles and cans and stuff, and all bent over and everything. And we just stopped in our tracks. And we went over there, prayed with him, gave it to him. So when I told the donor about the story, she started crying. She goes, that was my dad in the days. That would have been my dad.
Oh, man.
She said, how appropriate.
Dang.
So praise God.
Yeah.
And we had hundreds of those stories.
And all the God wings.
Yeah, God wings.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but I want you to share the story about the, medical treatment that you guys offered, and you just witnessed God do such a miracle. So listeners, sit tight. You do not want to miss this. Plug back in, and we'll be back with you in just a minute.
Hey Godwink listeners, Audrey Rose here. I am a copywriter and owner of Audrey Rose Copy. I specialize in all things written. What can a copywriter do for you? I write content that adds value and credibility to your business and copy that converts views to sales. Together, we can re-engage your audience with automated email funnels, grow your social media following with an engaging campaign, or give your website a refresh with enticing storytelling. Now, I don't want to take away all of your fun, but I will also write your release forms, terms of service, contracts, and those pesky privacy policies. Whatever your written needs are, I can save you time and provide a solution. As a special to all Godwink listeners, I am offering 10% off my services. Visit audreyrosecopy.com or follow the link in the notes to schedule a discovery call with me today. Be sure to mention you are a Godwink listener, and let's get started boosting your brand. Leave the writing to me.
Welcome back, listeners, to the Godwink podcast. I've been sitting here with Mel and Twyla, and they have been sharing how God has just shown up in such enormous ways through their ministry and through their obedience of doing this ministry. Because if I understand correctly, it's not too easy to start a nonprofit in the normal world, but in God's world, it's different. So there's a couple things you shared. Actually, I know about the medical ways that you're helping on the streets in a medical way, but before I forget, share the miracle that happened when you started the nonprofit.
Well, we knew we wanted to start a nonprofit for the ministry because certainly you can raise more money when people can be donors and they can get tax credit for doing that. So we knew that was something we really needed to do if we were going to make the nonprofit successful. Mm-hmm. So we asked around, and we found out that most organizations like ours use an attorney to file the paperwork with the IRS to get the certification. And we heard that it was taking a long time. It was taking 18 months, 2 years. There had been a long backlog with a governmental administration. I won't mention the name of the president, but there was a big backlog, and it was taking people 18 months to 2 years to get it. So we went to a couple attorneys, and we had gotten quotes anywhere from $3,000. I think one of the quotes was as high as $12,000 to do that. So we said, we don't have any money. We're not gonna do that. So Twyla had been a paralegal in her life, and as an HR guy, I had read a lot of contracts and dealt with a lot of governmental filings. So we said, let's do that. So we found a book called Nonprofits for Dummies with the yellow cover and the black letters.
So appropriate.
Yeah, so appropriate. I read the book, and we sat down, and we filed it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. We got the certification.
Yes.
So
God let us know it was time.
So we told people the story, and they didn't believe it. Most of our friends didn't believe it because of the backlog that others had suffered from. So we knew that was getting God's grace, and that was going to be the beginning of seeing Him work, mm-hmm. which we saw in so many ways. But with regard to the medical issue, this is one of my favorite stories to tell. I'm going to try to tell it. But we had a church, a big mega church in the Detroit area, in the suburbs, and they had a medical trailer. They had this huge, like a fifth wheel kind of trailer. They pulled it with a big Super Duty Ford pickup truck.
Once a month.
And they said, we are willing to come out once a month, and we'll set up along your route that you're doing on Michigan Avenue, and we'll bring medical people. We'll bring PAs, nurses, other kinds of medical professionals as we can recruit them, and you bring these people to our trailer who have medical needs, and we will treat them. So
we wanted to still do outreach that night.
Exactly.
So we took 2 vehicles. One was the taxi cab, and one was the regular outreach vehicle. And so when we convinced somebody that they needed to go down to the medical trailer, the taxi group would come and pick them up. And they trusted us. They wouldn't have trusted anybody else, but they knew us for as many times as they had seen us. And we would put them in our vehicle and then drive them to the medical trailer. And when the medical team was done with them, they would call us, and we would bring them back to exactly where we picked them up from.
And one of our friends, who part-time was a panhandler, and part-time she worked the street as a prostitute. She had been in the life, if you will, and she'd been addicted for a long time, and she had been a trafficking victim for a long time, and she was suffering from a lot of abscesses. Heroin users use dirty needles and don't have the greatest hygiene in the world anyway, and they get abscesses where they at their point in their bodies where they're using the needle. And she had a lot of abscesses in her body, and she was in very, very poor health because of just all the abscesses that she had. And we pulled up on her one night, and we talked her into going to the trailer and getting help from the doctors. Our friends on the street were very negative about getting medical treatment because they have traditionally been treated so poorly in the healthcare system. They go to ERs, whether it's in the medical center in Detroit or other hospitals, and they had been treated very, very badly by doctors and nurses. And the whole idea of being treated in an ER was very negative to our friends. So we had a hard time getting her to trust us enough to take her to this super duper trailer to have the PAs and the nurses work on her.
Right, but we'll call her Jessica.
Okay.
And Jessica showed me her arm, and there was a hole about the size of a softball in her forearm. And I could actually see the bone down inside of her arm, that the muscle and everything had just pulled away from it. And you could see nothing but yellow, and it was really gross. And I was like, we got to call the other group to take her down to medical. So she went down to the medical vehicle, and they didn't want to touch her. It was so bad, and they said she needed to go to the hospital. Well, our little taxi took her back to where she needed to be, and we talked to her about how she needed to get to the hospital. Did she want to go that night? No, she didn't. So she made it over there. The next week, when we came back, we were like, Jessica, what happened at the hospital? And she said they were going to amputate my arm. They said that's the only solution to it, to amputate my arm. And she fled. And we felt bad for her. And I mean, of course, she's crying. And we decided that, the great physician could take care of this one for her, since that was the only option we had. So everyone in the vehicle.
This is the next week.
This is the next week, yeah. And I said, just extend your hands this way and extend your prayers this direction. We're going to pray for Jessica right here, right now. And we did. And asked the Lord to take care of this very dire situation. And 1 week later, we came back, and that hole had closed up, and there was no evidence of infection at all.
Praise
and
God.
She was moving her arm around. Yeah, praise God.
Yeah, she was a character.
Yeah, and that's when it's God. It's not us.
Yeah.
And she got to see a miracle. We got to see a true miracle.
Yeah. And did your prayers feel like it was just now you're on fire, like to be praying for people?
Yes, but we can't get crazy about it, because then they won't receive us,
right?
They won't receive the prayer. So you have to be very gentle the way that you do it, So God was good, though. He showed her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the PA, she was kind of on our team before she was on the medical team. She was amazed. The PA was very amazed. I think it shook her. It strengthened her faith as much as it strengthened anybody else's. Because she had that medical mentality,
Yeah, this is outside of the norm.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, I would love for you guys to kind of walk us through how God was leading your steps, with the ministry, and as you saw some shifts happening, and how did God really confirm where to go next?
Well, it's a very tough dynamic on the streets. I mean, it's very dangerous. What we were doing was very dangerous, and we were smart enough. We didn't take a gun or mace or pepper spray or a baseball bat. And even our own team members were a little troubled by that, I think, at times. We had some guys that wanted to do a little Rambo, want to be tough guys. And we said, that's not what this is about. That's not what we're going to do. That's not how God is showing us the way. And it was a very difficult world to live in. Twyla grew up in a small town in Indiana that had one stoplight and 2 hamburger joints.
It was Kokomo, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, it's close. That wasn't even that big. So, this was a different world for both. Even the city of Detroit was a different place than I had grown up in than when we started this ministry. And it's very dark. It's very evil. You can't believe what you see. You can't believe the hatred, especially one of the groups that I couldn't believe, transgender people and gay people on the street become the victims of hate crimes to such a high level. We witnessed that, and we just couldn't understand it. It just, it just doesn't make any sense. how people can be so evil to one another, and how because women are working as prostitutes on the street, how others can have such a low opinion of them and perpetrate crimes against them as if they're subhuman. I mean, it just we saw it all the time, but it never made any sense to us. And it's a very dark world. And when Twyla said, I think we saw 7,000 victims, and when you can only help 600, that sounds like a big number, but there was a lot of people that got away. Those stories are very hard to take because our friends died when they didn't get help. Right. You try to help, you pray for somebody at the altar at your church, in your church building, and they leave and they decide to not come to church anymore. They don't die. Mm-hmm. But our friends got found in dumpsters. Our friends got found stabbed and shot and run over by cars. So we knew those people that weren't able to get off. We knew that there was a very ugly end, and a lot of times we saw that very ugly end of how it.
A lot of funerals we attended.
Yeah, we went to a lot of funerals.
Wow.
So it's very hard, and not that we're necessarily have PTSD, but we could feel the weight of that ministry over 10 years, that it was time for us to change our path. And Twyla told me, because I didn't talk to our team members the way she did, we found out that God began to move in a different way. And when we decided we were going to really retire, our second retirement, if you will, and get out of the ministry, we found out that all of our team members, God was calling to do different things. So God was in it at the close as much as He was in it, during the course of it. And then, as soon as we decided to close it up, He said to me, and then He said to Twyla separately, without us even talking to each other, that we needed to write a book about this. And I worked in the Ford Rouge plant for 30 of my 36 years of work, and I always said I was going to write a book about the crazy Ford Rouge plant. But clearly He wanted us to write a book about what we had seen. So what we did is, as a kid, I read it, and then I read it again. John Kennedy wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book it was called Profiles in Courage. And what he did is he outlined about 20 people that in the history of the United States had done heroic things of courage that shaped the way our country was formed, if you will, in its early days. And he won a Pulitzer Prize for it. So the Lord said, why don't you read that book again? So I went back and read it again, and I said, here's what I think He's telling us, is He wanted us to write a book about our friends. So we took 20 stories of the 7,000 people that we had worked with, our friends that we knew, and we wrote their stories. Now, you never hear a complete story, because it takes our friends many years of psychotherapy to be able to pull away that
layers.
That artichoke heart to really find out. But what we did is we decided, so that readers would understand the evil and the reality of sex trafficking, what we did is we sort of overlaid other parts of other people's stories so they could get a full understanding of what the evil really looks like. And we think we did a pretty good job of it.
We followed our awareness events and talked about the different ways that you get into sex trafficking, and made sure that we had a story for nearly every vulnerability that is on there. So there's 20 stories.
Vulnerability is, and I think I said it a little earlier, vulnerability is what that trafficker can see in you to victimize you. So when he goes to the shopping mall and sees a 13-year-old girl shopping with her other 13-year-old girlfriends, what does he have to do to reach out to her and victimize her? And it's a vulnerability, and it can be a lot of different things. One of the things that we saw in that vulnerability is aging out of the foster care system. I think about my two daughters when they were 18 years old and where they were at financially and emotionally, and if all of a sudden they had left the womb, if you will, and had to fend for themselves, what would have happened to them? Well, that's exactly what happens with children coming out of the foster care system. They're on their own. There's no social safety net for them. So the trafficker knows that. He knows how to look for and find those kids.
In fact, he sits outside some of these.
Exactly,
places.
institutions, yeah. And drug use, just recreational drug use, is a huge vulnerability. I don't know how anybody feels about, and I know smoking marijuana is now legal and it's okay to do, and people are doing it all over, but that recreational drug use creates a vulnerability that traffickers use. And there's lots of other kinds of vulnerabilities, poverty, gender. But there's lots of vulnerabilities that are out there.
We met women from females from age 12 to 65 on the streets. Every socioeconomic
65. I'm sorry, but
65.
I don't
Yeah.
even. I don't know
Yes.
why that doesn't come to mind.
Yeah.
Naturally.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Yep. And just every socioeconomic background. It just was crazy. We just couldn't believe the widespread that was there.
Yeah.
So
So we decided to write this book. It's now been published. It's available on Amazon. It's called Heavy Traffic, A Walk Through the
A walk of faith.
A Walk of Faith Through the Evil of Sex Trafficking. And it's 20 stories. We give a little bit of overview of the human trafficking problem and the sex trafficking issue. We try to do sex trafficking 101 in the book, but we really try to tell their stories because Hollywood doesn't do it right. The government doesn't do it right. Nobody's really, I think, putting out an understanding. People are beginning to hear about the problem. Awareness has risen over the 10 years that we've been doing this. There are more people who have heard about human trafficking and what it might mean, but I don't think anyone is telling the human and emotional impact that sex trafficking has on people.
But we were very careful in the way that we wrote this book that the girls that we are patterning these stories after, they will not be able to even identify themselves.
Right.
And we believe in not re-traumatizing them.
right.
Right. But there's enough similarity in victims so that what we took editorial license with is a reality.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And this book, did you write it soon after closing that chapter?
Immediately.
So it was fresh.
Oh, yeah.
That's the biggest piece is you were obedient to hearing that call that you had individually of writing the book, and it was so fresh in mind that it continues in a legacy fashion, right?
Yeah, and we were a very organized, I was an HR guy, Twyla was a ex-paralegal, so we kept diaries. We kept extensive notes because we had 28 team members besides us, and we wanted all the team members we wanted them to understand what had happened every week on the street because it was so important that when we pulled up to a victim that we could talk to them about what was the latest and greatest in their lives. So Twyla wrote notes and published notes every week to all of our team members, and they read about Mary and Susie and Janie and, everybody that we saw on a given night.
So that way, then the next team would be able to say, how's Aunt Susie doing?
Yeah.
I saw that your aunt broke her leg. Is she doing better? Have you talked to her? You
Wow.
know, so
Did you go home and try to see your parents again? Or
have you heard from
Whatever.
your kids?
Because you're trying to earn trust. You don't want to drop it just because of a
Right.
maybe transition or whatever that may be, or our own bad memory, quite frankly.
so it's the book we believe is drenched in reality.
We used all of those outreach notes, and we used all of our notes from every rescue that we had done, and you know that gave us our skeleton so that we could get started.
We didn't get writer's block.
We didn't get writer's block once. We didn't have a fight
No, we didn't.
even once.
Wow.
It just came out.
We've
It
been
just
married
rolled
for
out.
over 50 years.
Dang.
And
That's
Just rolled
perfect.
out.
God's good.
Perfect. Well, I want to make sure that our listeners have the link so that they can go on Amazon. Is that the sole platform that your book is on, correct? So listeners, if you are curious about the stories that are told, pick up this book, click the link within the podcast notes. We will make sure to have that for you. Are there any other ways that you would like our listeners to be able to connect with you, follow, any?
Yeah, we put a. Go ahead.
We're using my my email.
Okay.
It's Twyla, Twyla, Baggett, Baggett, at yahoo.com. And if anybody wants to support sex trafficking in the U.S. or in the Detroit area, there's a spot on there for another group that goes out on the east side of Detroit. And they go out 4 times a week, believe it or not, 4 times a week. And they have 2 houses. They're called Ellie's House 313. And you can contact them through their website, ellieshouse313.com.
I love that.
And you can support them financially. You can make some sandwiches.
Yes. Can always use the help, right?
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, the both of you, for joining me today and just sharing your story. It's so impactful when we can just openly share what God has allowed us to be a part of, right? His mission, his restoration. I remember even a good friend of mine, Renee Hendricks, she's always been such an integral part of Beauty for Ashes in like at the Flint area, I believe. And I just hear these women being restored. And are all of them, like you said? No, but like, can you imagine the day that we're in heaven to all those names, right? And the impact that's been made to the glory of God. So listeners, if today's episode really resonates with you or you know of someone that really needs to hear this episode, please like and share it with those individuals. And as always, if you have a God wink, we would love to hear your God wink as well. So feel free, visit our website at thegodwinkpodcast.com to submit your story today. So other than that, guys, be blessed and have a wonderful day.
I want to give a big thank you to Office Evolution Troy for providing their podcast studio for us this afternoon to record. If you have any questions or you would like to book your own time in their podcast studio, give them a call at 586-788-9966. If today's God Wink story really hit home with you, we would love to hear about it through the God Wink community on Facebook. If you know of someone that needs to hear today's God Wink story, show them some love and tag them on the God Wink podcast. You never know how a God Wink story might change their day around for the better. If you or someone you know has a God Wink story that the world needs to hear, we want to hear it. Simply click the link within the podcast notes to send in your God Wink story. Until next time, remember, God's got you. Wink, wink.